Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Frida Polli. She's the CEO and co-founder of Pymetrics. Frida, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Pymetrics is actually really innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. Yeah, I actually grew up overseas. So my dad is Italian, my mom is British, and I grew up in Milan.
Very cool.
And then we actually traveled around a bunch different parts of Europe. And then I ended up here in the US for college.
Very cool. So you've went to college and university. What did you take and why?
I was an English major. And then I was also pre-med, so I was kind of one of those undecided people.
Interesting.
And then my last year in college, I discovered neuroscience, and that was kind of when I fell in love. And, then it was kind of off to the races. So I became a neuroscientist after that and went and got my PhD, and then, transitioned into what I do now. But I was a bit confused in my early days of college as to what I really wanted to be, and had life plans to be everything from a journalist to a detective, to then a scientist. So
Interesting. So
a lot of options.
what got you interested in neuroscience?
I have always been fascinated by people and what makes people do what they do. And neuroscience was kind of this really new, cutting edge field that was allowing us to understand essentially like parts of the brain, how they influence people's behavior, their personality, how that was all influenced by, your experiences growing up, your experiences during life. So just fascination with people, honestly.
Interesting. So walk me through your career. You get out of school, you work for a bit, you get your MBA, and then walk us through that journey up until Pymetrics.
Sure. So again, I fell in love with neuroscience, kind of like my last year of college. And at the time, I actually thought I was going to go to med school because, again, I was pre-med. And
Sure.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to med school and be like a neurologist or something. And then I had this really bad experience of working in a lab where I was doing surgery on bunny rabbits, actually. And I quit after 3 weeks because I just couldn't handle the blood. And that's when I realized, okay, definitely not going to med school. I'm going to pivot over to a PhD. And so that's what I did. And so I was a academic neuroscientist for 10 years as a grad student, and then as a postdoc at Harvard and MIT. And that's obviously when I sort of delved into all things human behavior and really understanding people from kind of like a very intrinsic level. And then the sort of change from being a scientist to what I do now came really kind of during a life transition for me. I was in my mid-30s at the time. And things kind of just changed a lot for me. So I had a child, got divorced, and then became the breadwinner for my family in a very short period of time. And science unfortunately is super fascinating, but doesn't pay well. So I was making $37,000 a year in my postdoc. And I was like, you know what? I'm not sure this is going to work in the long run. And then I was also just getting a little bit bored, I think, by the fact that the science we were doing wasn't having as much application in the real world as I had hoped. And so the combination of factors led me to apply to Harvard, get a fellowship, and go get my MBA, which is kind of, and then I entered the next phase of my life, essentially.
Interesting. So walk us up until becoming CEO and co-founding Pymetrics.
Yeah, so I go to the MBA program at Harvard and, felt really fortunate to have this ability to kind of, hit reset, and was wondering, okay, I love the science that I do. I really want to do something applied with the science. that I'd spent so long studying, but didn't really know what. And then really the first year of my MBA program gave me the proverbial light bulb idea, because all I was doing was watching my classmates recruit. And I was just struck by the fact that, recruiting was still done using resumes and coffee chats and, referrals. And I was like, whoa, this hasn't changed at all since I was in college. And that was a while ago. And it all seemed very kind of unscientific and very like chickens running around with their heads cut off. And then at the same time, I was also, experiencing a career shift myself. And I was trying to understand what would I be well suited for. And I really had never worked outside of science. So I had no idea what career would be best for me. I knew I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, but, didn't see a lot of, mid-30s single mom CEOs gracing the cover of Wired. And so was really kind of struggling with this whole career search process, and also bemoaning the fact that it wasn't very objective or scientific. And that's how the idea for pymetrics came to be.
Interesting. So how did you actually decide to go for it one day? Because like you just mentioned, you had all these challenges and you didn't see other kind of female entrepreneurs doing this.
Yeah. So, I think at the end of the day, I'm a very passionate person. I'm very stubborn. And at the end of the day, I think when I get impatient enough about something, I just kind of I hit some kind of threshold and I'm like, just do it. And I think that's really what happened. I was like, I love this idea of studying people. I love this idea of trying to understand what makes people tick and then matching them to their ideal work, because it was, such a relevant topic for me. Saw so many people struggle with it. And that's kind of where the passion for it came. And then sort of the stubbornness and, sort of impatience was just if not now, when, right? I mean, at the time, I was just thinking to myself, if I don't take the leap now, I mean, America is a wonderful place in the sense that nobody looks down on you for starting a company and failing. Really, it's seen as a badge of honor. And so I thought to myself, okay, I don't have, this is the time to change careers. If I want to do it, no one is going to say, oh gosh, Frida, you started pymetrics and, in 3 years you had to do something different. Everyone's going to think that was awesome. And so, again, based on my own sort of personal lack of patience with the way things were and wanting to fix it. And also just this idea that if not now, when, I just kind of took the leap.
Sure. So
it was not an obvious choice. My dad, who is, a very traditional Italian man, basically was like, oh, Frida, oh, what are you doing? I could just tell his light bulb was going, oh my gosh, I sent my daughter off, she was going to get an MBA at Harvard and go get some nice paid, consulting job. And meanwhile, she's off, taking a plunge off the deep end. But he knew me well enough not to try to dissuade me. So
that's awesome. So what exactly is pymetrics?
Sure. After all this, what did you invent? Pymetrics is a behavioral science and machine learning platform that helps make career matching and job finding both more objective and more fair. And really what we try to do is match people with their right job, and in the process, remove some of the distortions or biases that are introduced by a number of different factors: structural bias, human bias, assessment bias, that really are getting in the way now of getting in the way of a couple things: getting in the way of people matching to jobs that they're really passionate about, getting in the way of everyone having the same opportunity set. I will say that, in hiring, there's a front door and there's a back door, and quite frankly, the front door is broken. And a lot of people are getting into the back door, and, we really need to fix it. I mean, there's a lot of concern these days about sort of income inequality and, lack of diversity in the workforce. And, economists even are waking up to the fact that, hey, this is not good for the economy, right? So we've gone from a place where economists were kind of like, as long as GDP is growing, we're all good, to a place where economists are saying, you know what, actually, all this bias and distortion, it's not good for the overall health of the economy. And I think hiring is just a massive place where we can intervene and say, if we are not matching the best qualified candidate, be they male, female, purple, five-headed, whatever their, situation is, to the right job, we are actually doing, both the person and society in general a huge disservice. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're really trying to make the process more objective and then also give everyone the same opportunity.
No, I love it. I think what you guys are doing is very, very much needed. But before we dive a bit deeper into that, you have a co-founder. How did you guys meet, and how did you guys fund the first version of the software?
Sure. So my co-founder left the business a few years ago, but she was really an incredibly instrumental part of building the business. So my co-founder and I met when we were postdocs at MIT.
Okay.
She was one of the few people who was as, impatient and, risk-taking as I, in terms of actually wanting to start a company. It's a small set of people that you could ask. She really, deserves all the credit for the initial building of the machine learning and artificial intelligence platform, because again, I always joke that I'm the lowly neuroscientist of the co-founding pair. She was, again, no longer with us, but, very instrumental in building the business.
No, interesting. Part of the reason I ask is just a lot of people sometimes struggle with finding a co-founder. So I'm always curious to know how
sure.
other people
Totally.
have met them, right?
Completely. Yeah.
No,
Completely. Yeah, I met her in the lab.
That's very cool.
Escaped.
So did you guys raise some money? Did you self-fund? How did that come
to be? You asked me about the funding.
No,
yeah,
that's
so
cool.
Basically we built the platform while I was still in school, and then we kind of had this idea that, like, if we could get one paying client by the time I graduated, we would start the business. And so that's what we did. We basically ended up having a client that paid us, a very small sort of friends and family round, let's say.
Okay.
And we sort of bootstrapped the first 15 months. And, we did all these crazy things. Like we lived together. That was also our office space. My daughter lived with us. I call it the two women in an algorithm phase of pymetrics. It was a very scrappy time when, the couch was also the computer table. And, it was this, sort of prototypical sounding story. And so, we bootstrapped. And then we kind of got to this place in kind of late 2013 where we're like, okay, we could keep doing this, but it would be really challenging. I mean, I think when you're trying to sell, AI software to large companies, they're not that excited to hear that, they just really want some security, and saying that you're bootstrapping the whole thing is not necessarily conducive to that. So we were very fortunate and were able to raise a seed round from Coastal Ventures in late 2013 based on kind of the idea for the science-based recruiting platform.
Very cool. And you guys have been around for close to 8 years now. Is that correct?
No. So the bootstrapping phase was when we were just trying to even see, does this even have any signal, right? So I would exclude that entirely. So we raised outside money about 6 years ago. And then really the first couple of years we were, a very small team.
Okay.
About 10 people. And again, it was a lot of data and algorithm building. So we didn't have a product in market until 2016. So again, depends on when you think of starting a company, but the actual product has only been around for a few years because it took a number of years to develop it properly. It just takes a while when you're building kind of like deep tech or whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess the point I was trying to get across is you guys built a company now where, whether you want to mention brands or not is up to you, but if you go to your homepage even, you have a ton of really well-known brands that I think most people have heard of inside and outside of North America, right? And so if you did it in less time than 8 years, it's more impressive than...
Oh, thanks.
Right? Well,
thanks.
Keep going, sorry.
It's really exciting. I mean, we definitely have, a lot of really great companies that are using us. And I think that speaks to the fact that, so I always say, like, we didn't intend to be trendy, but we somehow have become trendy. And by trendy, I don't mean that in kind of like the superficial way. I just mean we're very like relevant, essentially, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I think the reason we're relevant is because, for a couple of reasons. I think that people care a lot about hiring, what they call the right people. However they define that, obviously, is a different question. They also care a lot about diversity. I mean, we're lucky that some of our brands, like Accenture and LinkedIn, like they are, and Workday. I mean, I think that there's some of the brands that have been sort of publicly recognized for being leaders in the diversity space, really, which is exciting to me, I think. And then, I think the other way in which again, trendy may be the wrong word, but very timely. I think the other way that we're very timely is obviously around the whole notion of artificial intelligence and how we should or should not use that. And I mean, I think that is probably how I spend the vast majority of my time these days, is thinking about how do we design human-centered ethical AI systems. It's not easy, I'm not gonna lie, but it is critical, because I think that AI is a very powerful technology. And I think that we are being naive to think that it couldn't also be used in ways that we don't want it to be used, meaning just, bias amplification and all the rest of it. And so we really have to be careful, I think, as technologists, that we are taking all the care in the world to build it correctly. I think, and again, I think a lot of, I'm not a machine learning guru by any stretch of the imagination, but I think even people who really are sort of fathers of the field, right, Russell Stewart, have gone from sort of AI evangelist to being much more like sanguine about, okay, well, it's got some real potential to do good, but we also have to ward off this potential to just perpetuate a lot of the biases that we're already seeing in society. So my point is, I think the reason we have the great clients that we do is because what we're doing is very, very timely, and people are really excited about the idea of using technology to reduce bias, with the recognition that if we don't do it well, it could actually have the reverse effect.
No, 100% agree. So how do you leverage AI for employers using pymetrics?
Yeah, so pymetrics is an enterprise software platform.
Okay.
So we sell our technology to large employers mostly large employers. And they use it as a data point in determining whether to move the person along the hiring funnel. So we are typically used in the early stages. And that was kind of the insight that we had when I was in business school, was that, look, a lot of parts of the process are not ideal, but I think the place where people are failing the most is really in that initial stage. And I don't just think that, and there's data to support that, and meaning that the bias is really strong there. Any research study that's ever been done of sending resumes and then looking at callback rates, like meaning how many people get interviews, have shown massive advantages for people that are Caucasian and men over women and people of color, which is a huge problem. And then there's just a high false negative rate, in meaning that and we saw this with some of the early work we did at HBS, where people were very likely to reject someone based on a resume review, and then that person was likely to get like a full-time offer at a competitor. And it was just because the resume review process is so flawed. So that's kind of where we sit, is at the very top of funnel, as people say, and we're really helping recruiters make a more objective decision as to who they pass along to interview than whatever process they were previously using. So think of us a little bit as like blind auditions for orchestras, in the sense that, blind auditions increased women participation from 5 to 35%. Doesn't mean that humans weren't involved. They obviously still had to listen, but sure, it helped blind humans to their, blind the biases that humans have. And I think that's really critical. So I think that's a good way to think about what we do.
Interesting. So if I'm an enterprise customer, how long does it take me to get onto the platform and start using your platform to actually start hiring people?
Yeah, so it is not a long process. It's sort of like any other system, like Salesforce or whatever, that needs to be configured. Okay. But I would say, meaning what I mean by that is we do what we call custom modeling, which basically means that, if you are a client of ours and you're looking to hire a salesperson, we don't just tell you, we've profiled all these salespeople and here's what they all look like. That's sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes score. It's very generic. It doesn't actually describe anyone in particular. It just describes an average. And we don't think averages are all that helpful. Instead, what we do is we say, okay, you've got a whole bunch of salespeople at your company. Let's put them through the exact same platform we would ask a candidate to go through. And sort of from that, distill the traits that are the most essential for this person. And that's kind of where the custom machine learning comes in. And so that process takes more time than if we just said, here's a generic profile. But at the end of the day, it's just like anything else you configure for yourself. It works a lot better. And it just yields a better match to the things that are important at that company in that role, rather than assuming some sort of generic profile.
Okay. And then as an employer, how do I start collecting potential candidates for jobs?
So that just happens, automatically, right? If
Okay.
you are a large employer, your challenge is usually not getting people to apply to you. Like, you spend a lot of time, sort of working on your brand awareness, marketing, and whatnot. And so generally, these employers don't have an issue with application volume. If anything, it's the reverse, right? It's like, I'm having so many people apply, and I just don't have enough time to basically, I'm worried that I'm not spending enough time properly vetting everyone. And so that's where we can come in and be helpful.
So how do you do that? Like, do I just, all the resumes that I get to my jobs@mycompany.com, I forward to you guys, or how does that collection take?
So we're a layer in the HR technology stack.
Okay.
So what that means is, you go to a company that's using us, you fill in the initial application, and then, you may be asked to upload your resume, and then they will say, and then please complete pymetrics as a step of your application process. And
Gotcha.
People use it differently, but generally speaking, they're using it as an additional data point to, again, give them an objective sense of how well someone would fit for that role. The other cool thing that we can do, which is really sort of changing the application process, is we can actually help match people to other roles if they're not as well suited for the initial role they applied for. So think of it as just a little bit like a sorting hat. So, instead of just, the typical process, which is what I saw at business school, which is I apply to a company, most people reject over 90% of people that apply. So, I apply, I get rejected, and then I'm back at square one. What we can do is say, okay, let's say that at some point you get rejected from the process. It doesn't have to be at the pymetrics stage, it could be someplace else, because again, pymetrics is not auto-rejecting people. But let's say at some point you kind of transition out of that process. We can actually say, hey, you know what? I know that you didn't make it through here, but here's some other roles at that company or at other companies that would be really well suited for your profile. And again, the premise here is that everybody has a fit. Oftentimes they have multiple fits, right? And
Sure.
I think that's kind of what we see in life, which is that most people find their right fit eventually, right? Sometimes you have to find it more than once because you're not going to stay in the same career. It's just that process is so painful and so long and so inefficient and so filled with rejection. And, it's just an awful process. That matching process really is pretty bad these days. And so why not use the power of technology to make that process better for the people that are actually seeking the jobs, right? As well as obviously the companies. But I think at the end of the day, we're trying to help people find their right fit as well. And so this ability to rematch you to other roles, I think is super powerful from a candidate perspective.
Sure. No, 100%, right? Well, and even from an employee, it's almost from both sides, right? From an employer's standpoint and a candidate's side.
For sure.
Even if you don't, like, if I'm employer X, for example, and some candidate gets referred to maybe a competitor or somebody in a different vertical, I might end up hiring them down the road anyway, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about it, but I think that the traditional notion, and this is a very traditional notion, that I think really needs to be, like, this paradigm needs to be completely busted up. There's this traditional notion out there that there are these certain characteristics, let's say intelligence, right? That just make anyone who's intelligent is a good employee, and anyone who's not intelligent, whatever that means,
Sure.
is not. And there's a whole line of thinking around that, and there's a whole line of research around that. I'm not sure how much I believe that. I really think that it's all about, like, when we start thinking about there's a thing that makes some people great and everyone else not great, we start creating a world of have and have-nots.
100%.
And look at the way the world is now. Like, we've certainly created that world of have and have-nots. And I think a lot of it has been around this notion of this false dichotomy of, like, there's some good characteristics and then there are all these other ones that are not good. And that's not what we see. That's not what pymetrics sees. It's a strengths-based system. All the things we measure could be adaptive for any number of roles. It's just a question of how they all come together, how your different, parts of your profile come together, and how that predisposes you to be successful or less successful at any given role. And, I always say, like, yeah, I'm, pretty good at the things I've done so far. There's a lot of things I'd be terrible at. And, I'm sure anyone looking at me would put me in the intelligent category because, I test well and all the rest of it. But that doesn't mean that I'd make a great employee in many different things, right? So I just really think we need to break this notion of like, there's one or three things that are like awesome for everyone to have. I just fundamentally, that's not what our data show. And it's much more about getting a holistic picture of someone, not putting any particular characteristic on a pedestal, but really rather trying to use a strengths-based system to match everyone to their right fit.
No, I 100% agree with you. It's funny that you bring that up because I was having this conversation yesterday actually about like the SAT test. Obviously, if you do well, you're a smart person, but there's a lot of factors that if you don't comprehend the question properly or tests freak you out or a million other reasons, you could potentially
or you have a learning disability or all sorts of things,
And you could potentially do really bad on that, but still be really smart and qualified for a ton of jobs, right? So it's like, I love the fact that you guys basically take a bunch of different things to evaluate my skill set and other candidates' skill set to actually say, like, am I right for this job? Because at the end of the day, maybe you need somebody that's book smart and can read questions and do really good, or you could need the complete opposite, or somewhere in the middle, right? Or all of the above.
Absolutely. Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, I think, and again, look, I mean, not getting too much in the weeds here, but, there's the whole line of, basically scientific inquiry that has sort of promulgated this belief that, IQ is like the one thing that predicts job success everywhere, right?
Sure.
And again, without getting into the weeds, like, I think that, there's probably some marginal validity to that, but I think that the amount that we're discounting all these other things that are probably more important than, something that we call IQ, I think it's been just an inability to correctly quantify those other things. Like, everyone says how hard it is to measure soft skills. Well, that's essentially what we're doing. We're trying to measure soft skills. And I think when you can do a really good job of that, then all of a sudden you find how predictive these, in quotes, soft skills are in a way that, I think just totally moves just totally changes the discussion around what we're looking for, what makes a good employee, and so on. At the end of the day, it's less about whether IQ is or is not predictive. It's more just that we shouldn't put any one particular thing on a pedestal and say, this is the one thing everyone needs, because that's a sure pathway for creating a world of have and have nots,
Sure. Well, and then you guys are using machine learning and AI to basically level that playing field, give you the data to prove what you guys are doing. Is that kind of a very simplification of what you guys are doing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
Which is also really actually quite fascinating because it to your point, then it gets rid of the like age, gender, religion, all the stuff that you could easily judge somebody on right out of the bat.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And that's why I think that the sort of blind audition metaphor is a good one, because I think at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing, right? In the sense that, it's not like when they started using curtains, all of a sudden humans were out of the equation. The humans still had to listen to the music and say, oh yeah, good music, right?
Yeah.
But they weren't prejudiced by their biases. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, look, use pymetrics as a curtain to say, don't prejudice yourself by your biases. Use this as a way to take an objective look at someone.
Well, and then your AI is only getting better daily because you're getting more data. Is that fair to say?
Yep, that's fair to say.
Interesting.
Definitely.
So how do you guys decide and test to make sure you're not introducing new biases and trying to get rid of the odd ones that pop up here and there without maybe giving away your secret sauce?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think it depends on what you call a bias. And I'm not trying to be like cheeky about that. I just mean that, let's say that to be an accountant, you really need to be detail oriented, right? Okay. Now, some people would say, well, there's a bias to detail orientation. I'll be like, no, that's a job relevant soft skill, right? I mean, if you're not detail oriented, you may not make a good accountant because you're like misplacing zeros and I don't know what you're doing, right? So again, that I wouldn't call a bias. That's what we would call a job relevant, trait, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
100%.
we wouldn't be in the business of removing those. We'd be like trying to find those signals, right? A bias in my mind is something that is irrelevant to the job. And that's why I think sort of gender, ethnicity, religion, whatever those things are, largely speaking, seem to be highly irrelevant to whether somebody can or cannot perform a job well. And those are the types of, in quotes, biases that we would try to mitigate.
Interesting. And then do you collect data on the success of... Interesting. Okay. So then you guys...
We collect all sorts of data. Yeah.
And then do you kind of create like an ideal profile for all the different types of roles at a company, and then compare those roles to other roles that maybe not they're necessarily just their competitors, but all the other companies on the platform?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So once we have your profile, we can then rematch you if you are not successful in your first endeavor. So basically any profile that we have either at that initial company or outside of that company. And I think that that's just a really powerful concept as well, because again, then it's less about, I think another thing people don't generally like about technology in the hiring space is that, there's a lot of things. First of all, a lot of times it's black box. People hate that. The second thing is, that they may feel like, again, it's back to this have and have nots. Like if I can't pass a certain threshold, I'm like excluded, right? That's a very common feeling. So I think the more you can make hiring technology about connecting people with opportunity rather than limiting their access to opportunity, I think obviously the way better off you are. And that's really what we try to do is, again, turn a hiring process into almost like a career search at the end of the day, and really trying to find you the right fit.
Interesting. So on the candidate side, we've kind of covered it here and there throughout the conversation, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. You mentioned it's part of the submission process for a job, but you guys also have these little neuroscience-based games. How do you guys come up with those, and what exactly are those?
Sure. So the science-based games are scientific assays or tools basically that researchers across the globe have developed to look at things like memory, attention, planning, risk, and so on. And we didn't actually develop any of those. They are tools that the scientific community developed. So we just were lucky enough to sort of piggyback off of all this work that had been done. And again, this is stuff that we used to do in the lab, right?
Sure.
So we contributed to the body of knowledge, but we didn't invent any of them. We just used them for as a new way of looking at people. And I think that it's critical to understand that sort of new way of looking at people, new way of assessing people is actually really critical to the success here, because I think traditional ways of looking at people have been much more have and have nots world, in the sense of whether it's IQ or, there's people that have tried to identify the personality traits that everyone should have to make a good employee. And so we've really gotten into these paradigms whereby there are the have and have nots. We've taken a much different approach. And I think that the scientific way that we measure people is very, it allows us to take a very different approach to measuring people. And I think that that's just been critical to developing a totally different way of doing this, basically.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And actually, you gave some really good advice there. If people caught it, it's like, you didn't develop these games, you leveraged what's out there. And I think many people think they need to build 100% of everything themselves. And what they don't realize is if there's something out there that's freely available or pretty inexpensive, you should at least leverage it until you potentially need to modify it or redo it or build your own. And a lot of tech companies, and I think probably like Uber's the perfect example that most people have heard of, at least in most parts of the world. They only built maybe 15, 20, 25% of their technology. Everything under it is like Google Maps, and they use a calling service. Like, they didn't build all that stuff. They're leveraging other people's technology. And so I just want to reiterate that, because I think that's really good advice for people, especially when they're starting out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the way to think about it is that you yeah, you basically look. I guess the way to think about it, at least the way I thought about it, is like there's all this innovation that's happening. In our case, it was in academia, right?
Right.
That is sort of trapped there. It's like all this air in a bubble, right? And if we can find a way to actually leverage some of that innovation to solve some very important problems, we should. And that's, I think what you're saying is that, that technology has been built to solve all these different problems. And if you can find a technology that has a great, use case for a solution you're looking to, build, use it. And I couldn't agree more.
The other thing that it sounds really stupid even saying it, but you guys have optimized the candidate experience for mobile, which I find some of the
Yeah.
biggest recruiters and job sites out there
Yeah.
don't work at all on your phone or your tablet. And I think
No, I know.
majority of people are actually trying to apply for a
Everyone's
job
on their
on the
phone. I
couch
know.
or in
Yeah.
between kind of
I know.
balancing life, right? Like,
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah. I mean, we try, so thank you. If you think that we've done that, that's good. No, I agree. And I mean, I think, more and more people do, all sorts of things on their phone, obviously. My 14-year-old does her homework on her phone.
Sure.
So, because she uses Google Docs, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I couldn't agree more. So we kind of have to bring enterprise tech into mobile friendly world.
Interesting. No, I 100% agree. So, being a female CEO and founder, co-founder of a company, what advice do you give to other females that want to do it as well? Because to your point earlier is there's not a lot, we need a lot more diversity in tech and other people.
Yeah.
As a white male, we need less
Sure.
white males starting companies and
Yeah,
being in C-level
totally.
roles.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, I think starting a company, period, is not easy. So let's just start at
100%.
that. Like men, women, whatever, like unless you're a serial entrepreneur or you're just like a billionaire and you can
Yep.
fund it yourself, it's not easy. So, that having been said, there's lots of research showing that obviously it's harder for women, harder for people of color, even harder. I mean, Stephanie Lampkin of Blendor gave this ridiculous stat that there's like only 40 women, I think, 40 African American females who've ever raised more than $1 million. I mean,
Wow.
that's scary, right?
Totally.
So, so I think that the advice I would give is like that it's hard to begin with, and yes, it will be harder as all the data shows. However, that having been said, I think like anything else, you just have to try to be smart about it. So I think it's really important, obviously, to try to align yourself in whatever way you can with female advocates. There's a lot of funds out there now that are female only or female friendly or whatever you want to call it. And I think you should, leverage the hell out of them. I think that, it's having a good network is critical. I do think that, kind of one of the cool things about, being a female founder, or at least in our case, like we've built a very diverse workforce. Like we have, about 50% of the company so I went from making $37,000 a year to employing 140 people.
That's
about
great.
50% of whom are, 50% of them are women, and almost 20% are underrepresented people of color. So I think you can build a really inclusive workforce. And I think that you only have to fundraise a few times. You have to go to work every single day. So if your work environment is really, inclusive and a place where you can get a lot of strength from, it kind of like, provides a cushion for those times you have to go out and fundraise. And, fundraising is not fun for anybody. So, it's good to have a strong, like, you're nothing without your team. So it's just great to have like a strong team, behind you. But again, it's sort of like leveraging, like-minded people, realizing that it's hard. And then it's just like what they say about a lot of things in life, it's like not the success that defines you, but it's like how you deal with failure. And 100%. I think that, couldn't be more true here, because you will, like, by definition, fail, many times. I mean, fundraising, there's way more no's than yeses. Sure. So, it's a question of having that team that will help you pick yourself back up and encourage you in times of difficulty.
100%. The other thing that I think people don't realize about having diversity in their teams is you get different inputs on anything, really.
Sure.
Like, and
Definitely.
they can say, like this is a stupid example, but I think everybody can relate to it. It's like you take the colors red, white, and blue. If you're in North America and maybe even South America, people will be like, well, that's the colors of America. But if you're in parts
Right.
of Europe or other parts of the world, we're like, well, that's France, right? And it's like,
Yes,
well,
for sure.
and you're talking, and there's a million of those simple examples, but
For
what the
sure.
point I'm trying to get across is like if somebody comes to you and says they were born in a different country or they have a different background or whatever, and they say like,
Yeah.
look, we need to do this because we're trying to get more people in this vertical. If we like
Yeah.
flip the text and because they read differently, we need to do that, right? Like, and I know that's kind of a really crappy example, but if you don't think about what makes us different and cater
Yeah.
to those differences, then you could potentially miss a whole opportunity or another part of the world because you didn't do something, right? And if you never thought about it or
Completely
did the
agree.
research on
Yeah.
it, it's so
Yeah.
like, and you're also probably missing a huge percentage of the workforce, right?
Absolutely. No, I mean, that's the whole point is I think that, and again, I mean, this is getting into a broader discussion, but
Sure.
I think that there's so much evidence now that the system is not working for most people, right? And again, I'm not anti-billionaire, I'm not anti-anything. I just think
Sure.
that if we just look at it from a very plain perspective, inequality has increased dramatically. There's all sorts of, people, professions like teachers who, like hit one hard medical bill and they're living out of their car. I mean, this is just kind of nuts in my opinion. You know what I mean? And I think that, and then there's, again, this diversity problem and all sorts of, challenges. So I think that we can't look at the state of the world, the state of America, and say that it's working well for everybody. And I do think that hiring is such a critical thing to fix because, a job is an economic lifeline. Again, back to like, I was a single mom and all of a sudden became the breadwinner. I was like, holy moly, like I really need to, rethink what I'm doing here. And having a well-paying job is like the difference between, I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic, but like life and death almost, you know,
100%.
and if everyone doesn't have equal access to that, how can we possibly call this a fair society? We honestly, we can't, we shouldn't. And people don't have equal access. I mean, be completely clear. People do not have equal access to jobs these days. They just don't. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And again, it's the human bias, it's the structural biases, there are all sorts of biases. And again, I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. I'll tell you, you're never going to fix human bias. Like all these unconscious bias training programs, they make people feel good, but actually the research has shown they don't do a darn bit of difference. And sometimes they even make things worse. So I 100% believe that we must use technology to fix this. Like, again, it's that curtain thing. Like if the curtain hadn't come up, we'd still be talking about 5% of women in orchestras. We need technology as a blind curtain. The problem is not going to get fixed without it. However, the curtain analogy only works if the technology is actually helping and blinding the process and not making it worse. So we just have to, we have to be careful. So again, huge promise for technology to fix it, but some watch outs. We really need to make sure that the technology is ethically designed and human centric.
Sure. Well, and the other thing too is ever since diversity's been kind of put into, well, I guess the media has been kind of covering it a lot more and the lack of it.
Yeah.
I've also seen where some people just get hired. It's almost like skill set becomes irrelevant. It's just like you're this type of person, so we're gonna hire you because we need one of those, right? And you become more, which can almost wreck a team too if you're just hiring people because you need like that type of person without their skill set. Do you know what I'm trying to get at? Where you guys basically get rid of the negative side of the bias and just trying to like
Absolutely.
fix the problem by just like throwing a Band-Aid solution at it.
Completely. Yeah, completely. I mean, look, this is a hard problem to fix. And I think we really have to put kind of like our best thinking, forward on this. But yes, I couldn't agree with you more. So
interesting. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts around the people that are worried that AI is going to, take over the world and take all their jobs and all this stuff? Like, what are your thoughts around that? Because you're actually building this stuff, right?
Sure. I mean, look, I think we have to be real about AI, like in the sense that we can neither think it's this doomsday scenario, but it's not a panacea either. And I think we just have to be, again, it's all about the way that it's designed and implemented, and automation is responsible for taking away jobs in different industries. There's no doubt about it, right? I mean,
Sure.
the data are clear on that. However, automation and a more digital world is also creating a whole host of jobs that didn't even exist before. 100%. I mean, one of the coolest things I've heard recently is that apparently truck drivers make great drone pilots. So while we're going to automate truck driving, now there's such a thing as drone pilot, right? Which, there wasn't 5 years ago. So again, that's a great example of yes, people are trying to automate truck driving, which by the way is not apparently it's not great profession, right? It's long hours, you're away from home, you get into accidents. I mean, it's whatever. I've never driven a truck. That's what I hear. However, there's new stuff coming online that people with that skill set could be really good for. So I do think that, and again, what are we missing? We're missing that matching layer. And so 100%. A lot of people are thinking about how can we fix this? How can we create that matching layer? And I think, at the end of the day, I think technology can be a huge solution here. So again, AI is a complicated thing. It's not good. It's not bad. It is what it is. It is definitely happening. It's not going anywhere, I don't think. But it can be a solution, as much, if not more, than it can be a problem. That's definitely what I would say.
Sure. But through what you guys are doing at Pymetrics, you have the ability and the data to actually take a truck driver and turn them into a drone pilot, because you have the data to say, sure, they maybe absolutely. Never done this professionally, but they have the skill sets to do that.
They have
right?
the aptitude. That's right. They have the soft skills profile. Yeah. And the same, interestingly, we found that lawyers make great engineers, right? And everyone's complaining to me, lawyers, not enough engineers. So yes, we're making all of these really interesting connections. And I think that's what's critical in this day and age where kind of reskilling is front and center.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because it makes me think of an earlier point that you brought up about it's almost not about kind of somebody's skill set and education. It's how they apply it to their current job. And those skills can be applied to a different job in a completely different industry. So sure, if your job potentially gets wiped out by automation, maybe you do something a lot cooler at that company, or you move to another company or a different vertical because you have these skill sets, right? And you guys are basically building the data and the ability to say hey, company, we have this person that's been doing this role for a number of years. This job doesn't really exist anymore. They would be great for this job that you have because of these skill sets and the data. Interesting, right? And that's why I think what you guys are doing is so innovative and cool.
Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, look, I think that reskilling is such a critical component of what we need to do to make the workforce work for everyone. And there is a huge business case to be made for reskilling because, again, it's interesting. We focus on the media is focused on both. They focused on the jobs that are getting automated away. They've also focused on all these roles that people can't find enough talent for. So there has been coverage of both sides. However, the link that we need to make is that, hey, you can actually use those people who have been, sort of automated out of their current job and reskill them into new ones. And I think that's where the lack of imagination comes in. And again, not to harp too much on the resume, but, the problem with the resume is that it leads me and other people to think that it is my identity. It is what I have done, and therefore it's all I can do. And it's extremely limiting. And think about it, your job goes away. Basically, you start to feel like you're irrelevant, right? And what a horrible thing to feel, as opposed to if you're measuring somebody's soft skills and saying, I know you've never done this job, but you're a great fit, right? Then people are like, wow, it's very hopeful and optimistic. And so again, I think we need to move people. It's a lack of imagination. People have many different careers hidden inside of them, and it's sort of discovering them. So
well, I think the other thing too is people get bored in their industry, right? And they might choose to want to move to another career, but they don't even know what that potentially would be, right? And they could use a tool like you guys to help themselves figure that out.
For sure.
And that in itself's got to be rewarding, right? Because I've been in kind of tech a couple of decades now, and I understand that. And I've known a lot of people that have come and gone from tech, and then maybe some come back, some never come back, right? And
Absolutely.
they have to go back to school, and maybe that was a good idea. Maybe they could have just transitioned to another industry. We'll never know, right? But now you guys have the data and the AI to actually back it up, and you can actually land them a job, right? Because some people don't have the option to go back to school when they're married and have kids and they're trying to pay a mortgage and other bills, right? But if they could just move to another industry and pick up, that's actually, it kind of gives them hope, right? And a feeling of being wanted. Yeah, interesting.
Completely. And again, I mean, like, not completely analogous to the situation I found myself in, but somewhat analogous because, when you've studied neuroscience for 10 years, it's not like you have a ton of other marketable skills, So, I mean, yes, a lot of people can find themselves in that situation. A lot of people who might not even think that they may find themselves in that situation may in fact do that. So.
No, I 100% agree with you. But we're kind of coming to the end of the show, but is there any other advice that you would like to give people out there, whether it's from starting a company or things you've learned over the years that you wish more people would know, or any other advice you have for people?
I don't know. I think all I would say is that, I mean, I guess it's just a couple things. One is don't give up hope. I think when you lose hope, whatever that might be, I think that's when it's really tough. And I think especially when you're kind of like wondering what in the world am I going to do in my world of work, it can be very hard to kind of remain hopeful if you feel like, again, my job is being automated out of existence. Somehow I'm needing to change jobs and so on and so forth. And I think, it's about retaining hope and retaining a belief that, you have value and that you have inherent abilities to do things, and it's just a question of figuring out what those things are that anyone should focus on if they find themselves in that situation.
Perfect. Well, Frida, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show. So
thanks for having me.
Let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and pymetrics.
Yeah, sure. Just go to pymetrics.com. It's PY and then metrics.com. And they can find out everything they want to know about pymetrics there.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. And hopefully we can keep in touch and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I super appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.